Hi everyone, welcome to this week's Weekly Notice with Andy Ngo. Today is the 25th of August and we are on episode 21, I think. No, episode 22. Wow. You probably noticed if you're watching that there's a new environment in my background. I'm traveling right now, but it's really important that I do this show for you guys, and so I found a little corner of a room to get this going, and I have a exciting show ready for you with the very special guest that I did an interview earlier with Lindsay. Last week I interviewed my former colleague Mia Cathell, and I think once upon a time, I used to do podcast interviews, actually. You can still find it on, if you search on all the podcast places, it's called Things You Should Know. I think it's a great show. It ran in 2018 and 19. I interviewed, at that time, people like Jordan Peterson, Sargon of Akkad, also known as Carl Benjamin, and others. And this is before I did a lot of my Antifa reporting and before I was better known. But it's been several years since I've done that type of person-to-person in-face recorded interviews or digital interviews in the case of Mia, and it's great to do it again. I always talk about how I feel a little bit shy about my camera presentation skills, but I think with interviews, particularly when I'm picking a guest that I'm already acquainted with or have worked with or spoken to before, I feel more comfortable and it comes out. And I hope you could see that in my interview last week with Mia. So later on this live stream, I'll play the interview with Lindsay. Okay, so did you hear that there was another mass shooting in America, a deadly mass shooting, happened in Atlanta, in Midtown Atlanta? If you didn't hear about it, you might be able to guess why. So on August 22nd, there was a deadly mass shooting that resulted in 2 people being killed. One was taken hostage and another person was shot and seriously injured. That person's condition is unknown, although they're still alive right now in hospital. The reason you didn't hear about it is because, well, in my view, it didn't conveniently check the points that mainstream media, liberal media, care about. They only really care about mass shootings, deadly violence, if it can fit within a larger narrative. So as I've discussed before, most of the mass shootings that are carried out in America are in the context of gang-related warfare, gang-related violence in urban areas affecting primarily Black communities. Those mass shootings nobody really cares about. And in fact, I think it kind of reveals there's a racism there, and I don't know how to use what adjective to use, but it's a view among liberals and leftists and liberal white people that violence that is deadly gun violence that is endemic within a Black community, they just don't really care about. Whereas when a mass shooter, let's say, happens to be a Republican, be white, be male, be far right, anything that fits a certain mold of a particular enemy, then they go crazy over it. That's when there's a lot more discourse about, what is about domestic terrorism in America, about what's radicalizing young white right-wing men. And to be fair, I do think that category of ultra mass shootings, I'm talking about ones where you have more than a dozen people shot, or dozens of people shot, and many killed. Those type of mass shootings do fit a particular pattern, a particular demographic. But then I think it's really dishonest by the gun lobby groups to then trot out this, all this data about how many mass shootings there are in America, and then conveniently leave out, well, the overwhelming majority of them don't fit these far right, white supremacist type shooters. In fact, they're usually black. But anyways, back to Atlanta. So on the 22nd of August, there was a mass shooting in Midtown by a woman, allegedly, by a woman named Raisa Kenga, and it's a black female. That is a pretty interesting detail of this case, just because that is that's an uncommon demographic represented in mass shootings. Mass shootings are almost entirely committed by males. And then within that, if you want to break it down racially, black and white. And so for there to be a black woman accused of carrying a mass shooting, that's uncommon. So here are photos that were released on social media by journalists. She was apprehended after the shooting at the international airport in Atlanta. Police, as far as I know, haven't said if she was in the course of trying to flee. But I mean, what else would she be doing in the airport, right? She was wearing characteristically black and white shirt that really stands out in the security footage that was released. And so she's been charged with, let's see, Raisa Kenga, which it's an African name. I forget from which country. I don't know if she comes from a migrant background, but it's interesting. Let's see. So she's charged with 2 counts of murder, 4 counts of aggravated assault, possession of a firearm, and false imprisonment. So the one of the victims was her former supervisor for a job she was in, which apparently there was some legal dispute. She had sued, but her lawsuit was dismissed. The property manager of the condo where she was living was also murdered. So this this was like a targeted killings, allegedly, of people that she knew and allegedly had grievances with. But yeah, so okay. I'm gonna play now the interview that I did earlier with James Lindsay. James and I go back a few years, back to 2018. Actually, I first met him in 2017 when I was still a student journalist at Portland State. He was invited by the college Republicans at that time, and I remember attending the event that he spoke at. At that time, he was speaking a lot about atheist philosophy. He comes from the world very similar to Sam Harris, which we discuss in this interview, by the way. But if you know of him now, you're probably familiar with his work on critical race theory. James Lindsay and Chris Rufo, I say, are one of literally a handful of people who have really helped to explain critical race theory to the masses. And James, until this past week, was on Twitter and had a very large following, but he was very he was confrontational in his style, which was to go hard after the ideologues, and he referred to them as groomers. And I asked him about that. I know there are some who feel that word used in this particular context applied to critical race theory, critical gender theorists is inappropriate. James defends it, and I think he makes a pretty compelling argument. But in recent months, Twitter, because of pressure from left-wing activists, has moved to censor and suppress when people refer to others as groomers, as a smear. Far left activists have successfully convinced Twitter that using it in that context is explicitly an anti-LGBTQ slur. And so James was permanently suspended this past week, and I was very lucky to get to do a interview with him discussing a number of issues. Hi, James. Thanks so much for making time with me. I appreciate this interview and this opportunity to talk because you and I go back actually a number of years. It's weird for me to think that back in my early days of journalism, you were one of the first people I met, one of the first I interviewed back in Portland, Oregon in 2017 or 2018 that the grievance papers scandal story came out.
That was in 18, yeah. It's been a while.
Yeah. Those were the days. A lot has changed in this movement. I guess at that time that was kind of pre-IDW, early IDW. I mean, that whole entire thing's fallen apart. But, you know, your profile has grown significantly. People are, you know, are obviously familiar with your works on explaining critical race theory. I think you are probably one of the very few people I could count on probably one hand in the United States who helped mainstream and distill a lot of these really complicated far left academic theories for a wider audience to be able to better understand. So and now you started for a while now new discourses. And anyways, I've been a fan of your work for a long time. A lot of the people watching this will be fans as well. And unfortunately, very recently, you were permanently suspended from Twitter. And I wanted to talk to you about that. You were very unapologetic in using OK Groomer, using the term groomer to refer to people who were ideologically grooming children and the public into a certain political ideology. Were you the one who actually coined like that in this particular context?
So I want to be as fair and honest as possible. I have been informed with evidence provided that it had been used by other people before I started doing it, but I thought that I had begun it. I did not know other people were doing it, and I started doing it on Twitter, and I probably am the person who popularized it. Radical feminists apparently had been doing it in their forums and sometimes in public-facing accounts to go after trans activists as well for a period of time before that. But so I can't claim that I was the first person to ever do it, but I think I can claim credibly that I was the one who popularized it and kind of drove it into the mainstream.
But I'm trying to map out like how you got from, because when I knew you actually in 2017, 18, 19, you were so unapologetically left-wing and so anti-Trump. And now I think a significant portion of your supporters that I see online are conservative, Christian, Trump supporters. How did these two worlds and your previous views, I don't know if you still hold on to those views actually, like how do you get from there to here is what I'm asking.
Well, if I might paraphrase the great Thomas Sowell, facts. As it turns out, the left has been going, as you know as well as anybody, or better in some ways than most people, the left has gone off the cliff. I don't know that I am technically conservative. I get identified that way a lot now. My views, however,
you get called
the
far
left
right.
And of what enables the left. Oh, I know. I got told the Human Rights Campaign put out a thing recently saying that I use alt-right terminology like cultural Marxism. Which is just a term that's been used for over 100 years. So how it's alt-right terminology now is a mystery to me. But anyway, watching through 2019 and 2020, when in a sense woke stopped being fun and just this stupid but dangerous thing that was happening primarily in academia and kind of in some of these, circles in journalism, and it turning into something that had gripped the culture completely, and then studying its antecedents and its kind of trajectory into the public led me to completely reject that and completely reject everything that enables it. And so it's funny you bring up that a lot of my followers and friends and supporters are Trump supporters. I frequently remind them that I think I'm more MAGA than they are. I am not in the sense of being all that enamored with Trump personally one way or another, but in the idea of a make America great again, to renew America back to a constitutional republic as opposed to something that's undergoing a communist revolution. I'm probably more committed to that cause than the majority of my conservative supporters are. So maybe that's why they call me far right. I don't know. My views are still fairly moderate on most points, except to deal with the inclusion of what boils down to communism in a new form in the United States, which I feel unambiguously has no place here, and I want to see it completely removed, except as a matter of private belief that people are entitled to have under the Constitution.
Where does Antifa's anarchist communist ideology fit into this cultural revolution, in your opinion?
I mean, historically speaking, and because of your book as well as anybody, this is a little bit complicated, but they are in some sense a kind of on the ground shock troop, but they are also wild and anarchist, right? So they have a different model. I don't think that the Antifa is going to be particularly happy with corporations like BlackRock and Vanguard becoming the de facto rulers of the world, and so they are. Again, I think Yuri Bezdomov called people like them political prostitutes and said to basically put no energy into them. They just do what they need to get done for you, and then you make use of them. And let's pray for Antifa that they don't get their way, because they're going to get shot. They're going to get locked up. Every one of those criminals is going to be completely worthless to the new regime once the new regime's in place. So the role that they play is there. Now, philosophically, they're not ambiguous. Antifa write in their own books that they, take their inspiration from characters like Frantz Fanon, who had strong Marxist influence. That's a French Algerian post-colonialist in the 50s and 60s. He wrote The Wretched of the Earth in 1962. He advocated violence to throw off colonization and to regain your sense of self. They openly embrace him. They openly embrace Herbert Marcuse. They openly embrace the idea of either a Che Guevara style or a Maoist style cultural revolution, although they may not praise the idea of the guy at the top. And so they are a absolutely crucial paramilitary entity that is strategic enough not to organize, at which point it would have to be cracked down upon beyond kind of networking and undergrounding and kind of a syndicate kind of style. But they are an integral part of making this thing happen. They're not quite the Red Guard. They're more like if we just cut the anti-crap out, which is a lie that they're actually fascist. They're more like Mussolini's black shirts than they are like anybody else. Which, how do they dress? I mean, come on. But they, just like the communists said, so Bella Dodd gave testimony. Dr. Bella Dodd gave testimony in 1953 to the House Un-American Activities Committee, or House Committee on Un-American Activities, we'll say it correctly. And she testified as a disaffecting communist about everything that the Communist Party was up to and what it did. And she said explicitly, they take on nice-sounding names for themselves, like anti-fascist, and then position themselves as the only people who are truly against fascism, so that everybody who opposes them, they say, was an anti-fascist. And so by the law of double negatives, it must be a fascist. And it's this kind of, idiotic Manichaean kind of thinking that characterizes their entire movement. And so there's the part of me that's, human and, gets pissed off, that seriously hopes that the communists get their revolution, that Klaus Schwab or whoever else gets what they want, and every one of these motherfuckers goes to prison or gets killed because they were on the wrong side of history, thinking they're on the right side of history. And I would love to be able to watch it, because they put those people down before they put down the resistance, as it turns out. But then there's a part of me that's human in another way and sees the bigger picture and really hopes that they don't end up in that fate and that we can turn this thing around before it gets to that point, because it's horrific and nobody deserves that, even these poor, deluded political prostitutes.
What do you think of this is the argument that Antifa and their allies and supporters and fellow travelers say. They say that they have to exist, their militancy needs to exist because the threat of far-right, racist, nationalist, Christo-fascist ideology is everywhere, overwhelming, targets people of color and minorities, and that they need to exist to operate as protectors of these communities, because the state being systematically racist and homophobic and, you know, all these other phobias that they list out, that they therefore must organize and do their direct action, which their MO primarily, when it's on the street, is to directly assault and fight and or kill if need their political opponents. And then the whole online world, it's the doxing and research and working with like larger institutions, SPLC, etc., working with journalists, passing on information to launder reputation smearing of targets. So that's a long question.
Yeah. No, it's fine. First, I'll actually point out that their primary tactic is what's called mid-level violence. It's a form of political violence where you are engaging in a type of provocation that's just like a toe over the line or a foot over the line without going all the way over the line. And they do that specifically because they either want you to back down, in which case they win, or they want you to react, in which case they will film you and make it look like you overreacted so they can create the smear campaign to destroy you and force you to back down or force you to be silenced or move on. It's a very strategic manipulation, and it's called mid-level violence, and it's actually well documented. We're just politically, in terms of political warfare in the United States, we're all fairly ignorant, but Antifa's not. Now, as to their claim that they need to exist, I'll give them some credit. In the 1940s and 50s, when they were coming together, 30s, there was some truth to that. But this is not true any longer. So it's just a BS pretext so they can keep living out Herbert Marcuse's wet dream of refusing the entire society and pretending that we live in a state that he called repressive tolerance, where the right wing, the Christo-fascists, and all of these people are actually recruiting and actively growing, and that these communities actually needed protection. I'm sorry, guys, that died. That's not real. That stopped being real in Western nations a long time ago. I'm not saying that there's no right-wing fanatics. I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying that actually there's no need to protect from them through street militancy any longer. That's a fantasy that's dead at least 40 years. And you can say whatever you want, but if I were going to tell somebody who was a thoughtful person shaking a little bit loose from Antifa and that mentality, what I would tell them is, you, Antifa, are the primary cause of the thing that you claim to be fighting. So you're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're pissing people off to the point where they react against you and they become reactionaries because you're using these mid-level violence provocations that piss people off and don't give them due pathways to recourse. So they're left with, well, if you're going to make me look bad, I'm going to deserve to look bad. And then you have entities like the Proud Boys showing up and being total dickheads. So they are creating the thing that they use to justify their own existence, which in other words is snake oil. The best case that they can make for themselves is a snake oil argument that because what was historically no longer is, and their idea that systems and structures are infinitely self-perpetuating, which is a Marxist belief about how the bourgeoisie rig society and dictate ideologies to keep themselves in power and to exclude certain other voices, is actually just a projection of how Marxists think, which is again why, as political prostitutes, they should really think twice about what they're supporting, because they're not useful to a regime except destabilizing the existing thing. Destabilizers are not useful to a regime that wants to be sustainable. And so they're going to be done away with or locked up or house arrested or put on the most strict forms of social credit limiting that anybody in this society is going to have. And they can whine and cry and piss and moan and try to mid-level violence a regime, a real regime, not a free country that allows them to get away with mid-level violence, and see what happens to them. They wouldn't get away with this shit in China, I'll tell you that right now. The Chinese government, if somebody tried to do what Antifa does in China, would smash their asses so hard they'd all be in standing room only prisons under Tiananmen Square until they die. That only works in free countries. It only works in the place exactly that is not what they say. So they're selling snake oil. They've deluded themselves, and they're selling snake oil to justify being little assholes. That's my opinion of them.
If I looked on your social media, on Twitter, I would get this perception that you've been permanently suspended for repeated hate speech. I want to give you the opportunity to sort of, going back to that okay groomer question at the beginning, why in your mind was that a good response to describe the people leading a lot of this brainwashing, and why you viewed, even knowing that when Twitter was being placed under pressure to censor people for using that word, that you, in my understanding, continued with anyways and paid a pretty heavy price. You've lost access to a big platform. You worked really hard to build up a large audience on there. Obviously, you have other things you're doing as well, but to lose access to that large audience is a big deal, I think.
Yeah, well, so there are two primary reasons why OK Groomer was fantastic. One of those is rhetorical, and one of those is descriptive. The descriptive reason is very simple. They are groomers. They are groomers into an ideology. They are cult groomers. That cult grooming is into topics of sex and sexuality and gender in ways that actually require introducing things like sexual conversations, sexuality conversations, gender conversations, sexual topics, sometimes the viewing of pornography, sometimes questionable materials like the book Genderqueer that have graphic drawings. They're cartoons, but they're still graphic drawings of one teenager performing oral sex on another. Technically not, because it's on a strapped-on sex toy, but whatever you want to make of that, that's there. It's a very graphic book. And so this idea of these things happening, and then, well, we're going to use this as a vehicle to initiate and then promote social transition that we're then going to hide from your parents, and this positioning of the facilitators in the school, whatever they are, teachers, administrators, nurses, social workers, whatever their role, their specific job, they're facilitators. The facilitators of this process, not only advocating hiding this from the parents, but then also pushing it along further and further, actively, again, positioning themselves as the equal and the friend and helper of the students, while they're positioning the parents, for example, as a potential danger. If you have to hide something from your parents, maybe they won't understand you. We have to protect you from them. We have to protect you from your parents. There's no better word for that than grooming. So in a technical, descriptive sense, it's the best word to describe what's actually going on. Now, in a rhetorical sense, and it's not the word groomer, it's the phrase "okay, groomer," is rhetorically awesome. First of all, it's just dismissive. That you can say it back to anything, and therefore it has like infinite power. We learned that with OK Boomer. Once you introduce, which is the other reason it's rhetorically awesome. I just stole one of their things and reappropriated it back against them, which is awesome. You remember we have that chirpy pretty girl dancing around. OK Boomer, wearing the Bernie shirt. No matter what the boomer says, anybody classified as a boomer, you don't have to answer their argument. You don't have to engage with their argument. OK Boomer, and it's over. There's nothing they can say. It's very dismissive. It's very very powerful rhetorically in that regard. And OK Groomer does the same thing, as if we all should have permission not to listen to somebody who's a groomer about their tortured arguments for why they should be allowed to continue grooming children. And I will say that I don't believe the majority of these people are pedophiles, but if we were to adopt the left's logic about systems and structures, we would say that they're supporting structural pedophilia, because pedophilia is occurring. There are children that are being victimized. They are being victimized by people who are taking them down this path, and thus the entire apparatus of supporting that would be, under their own line of thought, structural pedophilia. That they're engaging in. But we've seen what would happen, Andy, if you were, say, a structural racist. Well, they just drop it. You're a racist. You're supporting racism. So these people are just pedophiles, and they're just supporting pedophilia by their logic, which of course we don't accept. But if we're going to have a double standard where they get to play that game, this OK Groomer thing hits right back into that the other direction. And obviously it proved that they couldn't get the stink hit them, and they could not get the stink off of them. It's like they got sprayed by a skunk and they just could not wash it off. The groomer thing has stuck. They can't get away from the groomer thing. Their attempt to block people like me and now Colin Wright and other people for kind of challenging some of this stuff. Libs of TikTok is under kind of constant threat for this, has been banned permanently from Facebook. Gays Against Groomers got banned permanently for being anti-LGBT. They're literally a 100% gay organization, and they're apparently homophobic now because they were saying groomer. All it's doing is revealing to more and more and more people that there's something to this. I can't tell you. I got probably 1,000 emails or messages, texts or whatever, after I got kicked off of Twitter. And this is just 2 weeks ago. I probably got 1,000 messages of people saying, I thought you were going too far with the groomer thing, and now I believe it completely. Now I believe that that's exactly what they're doing, and they're trying to censor it because they don't want people to see it. And I think it therefore is a virtually perfect term. Now, technically, I will point out, on a very technical level, I did not get kicked off of Twitter for OK Groomer. I got suspended for 12 hours from Twitter, or locked out for 12 hours for OK Groomer, after which I deleted all of my OK Groomer tweets. Every tweet where I called somebody a groomer, I went and deleted them all proactively because I knew they were going to try to target my account with it. And so I deleted them all. What I actually got kicked out of Twitter permanently for was OK Child Sexualization Specialist, which I thought was a clever way to reword the similar idea, but not use the G word. And so I actually believe I got kicked out of Twitter permanently for beating a leftist at a word game, which they don't tolerate very well.
Okay, last subject I have to ask you about is the Sam Harris controversy. Okay, so in this viral clip, most people have seen it, I'm just going to recap it. The most controversial part is he was quite loose with his words at one point in describing his hatred of the former President Donald Trump, which is already well known and been on record on a number of his podcast episodes years now. He illuminated that hatred by saying that he thought it was warranted for big tech to censor the reporting on Hunter Biden ahead of the election, that really Trump was such a danger and horrendous person that wouldn't have mattered if Hunter had dead children in his basement. Obviously, that was hyperbole, but the sentiment was essentially, by any means necessary, Trump needed to be prevented from being reelected. Of course, Sam has clarified that he wasn't advocating for election fraud or anything like that, but he stood by his comments, and there was a lot of uproar on the right. And people like myself who were very big fans of him going back many years were I was shocked just because I think it really, if I interpreted his words correctly, he's arguing for the undermining of the cultural norm of freedom of expression. And you need that cultural norm for the legislation to have legitimacy. So, anyways, I asked you for your thoughts. What do you think?
Well, I agree with you. I wish I could say that I was surprised or shocked. And I think I wish I was shocked. But I've watched Sam kind of descend into this this kind of corner with regard to Trump for a long time. Now, it was hyperbole when he mentioned the dead children, but I will remind people that he argued very forcefully in 2016, ahead of the election, when Trump was elected, that he would prefer any random American to be given the office rather than Donald Trump. Any randomly selected American would be a better president than Donald Trump, which I don't think is true. And that's a very risky thing to have said, at any rate. And so his hatred for the guy, but in 2016, I find it somewhat more comprehensible, didn't diminish through the course of Trump's presidency, didn't diminish through the exposure of the many lies that were propagated about Trump, regardless of anything. Because in the interview with Constantine and with Francis, he said specifically that whatever the corruption of Joe Biden It's nothing. It's a firefly to the sun in comparison to the known corruption of Donald Trump. But it seems to me that Sam Harris doesn't know that many of those stories were false. They're demonstrably false. They have been demonstrated to be false. And whatever corruption remains, the number of lies and misdirections that were spun about Trump is just almost unbelievable. The media at no point ever did it tamp down. And Sam never backed away from this. I think he tweeted earlier in the year when things started to get quite bad, or some point last year, that he was having to eat every single syllable of his tweet, that he was so glad the adults are back in the room watching the Biden administration. I think that was in the wake of the catastrophe last year in Afghanistan is when he decided he had to tweet that, but I could be mistaken about the circumstances there. So I watched this. This is a complete... This is the final conclusion, the end point of Trump derangement syndrome is what this is. This is the point where a very smart person has had a successful psychological operation done to them that has deranged them to the point where their grasp on reality, as John Baudrillard put it when he was describing hyperreality, that he has actually no contact with reality whatsoever, and no capacity to contact reality on this issue. His lack of moral clarity and political clarity and just kind of common sense, with, as you said, his willingness to undermine the legitimacy of a democratic republic and the way that it forms laws and the way that it executes laws is just mind-boggling. I've wanted to say for years, since I finally read it, I finally get around to reading these critical theorists, and there's this book published. It's the magnum opus of critical theory. It's called The Dialectic of Enlightenment. It's by Max Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno, published in 1944, repackaged and republished in 1947 with significant changes. And that book says that what happens with Enlightenment thinking is that Enlightenment claims to get rid of mythology, but becomes its own mythology, a myth of rationality, of instrumental rationality, as a matter of fact. And I never really fully grasped what that book was about until I watched Sam Harris go crazy. And I was like, oh, Sam Harris is the embodiment of that book's point, is that, in fact, this kind of cult of rationality that he has kind of embroiled himself into, it left him extraordinarily susceptible to this psychological operation that was terminally effective on him. And I say terminally because I think he is now in a position of being in utter shambles. I kind of giggled. I'm still somehow on his mailing list for his podcast. I signed up for it many years ago and just never hit unsubscribe. So I got another update, I think today or yesterday, in my email, and I just kind of giggled. It's like thinking, oh, you're still putting things out after that. So I think that was, those are my thoughts about the issue. I mean, it's sad. I'm not shocked. I've watched The Descent into Madness. I feel as though this is a form of madness that had initially captured me, and I got pulled into its gravitational pull, as you mentioned earlier in the interview, and then I escaped that pull and feel as though I became able to see reality more clearly. And people like Sam Harris hesitated not at all to call me insane as a result, and I hesitate not at all to return.
He called you insane
at this point, where I don't remember if he I mean, many people in the orbit did. He certainly insinuated that I had gone off the track because of my support for Trump, and he had followed me on Twitter, and then he had unfollowed me on Twitter and said some quite difficult things about me. I can no longer search to see what he said about me, which I would do and let you know for clarity, because I no longer have a Twitter account. So I can no longer go find that out. But it definitely occurred on Twitter. It wasn't a private conversation. That I was poo-pooed pretty hard by Senpai there. And it was over the Trump issue. I mean, I'm blatantly like the world's leading conspiracy theorist now after Alex Jones. I've actually heard that I'm considered that way. And it's funny because, like Alex, my conspiracies come from reading the books of the people whom we would call conspirators and saying, well, this is what they said. And then people say that's a conspiracy theory.
For people who maybe have only seen you on social media, they really should be consuming your video work and your written work, because there's so much intellectual depth to your views and your ideas that you're not able to obviously say in a short tweet. And so What are the places where you would like to direct people to read more of your work or watch
I mean,
your work?
Yeah, if you want to keep up with that, I have a podcast that's called the New Discourses Podcast. It has a kind of subsidiary in it that's called New Discourses Bullets, and so that will tell you that the bullets are short. The New Discourses Podcast itself sometimes is as little as half an hour, but sometimes exceeds 4 hours per episode. And people who want to know, I record them in a single sitting, in a single take, and so I almost never stop the recording or edit them in between for content. It's just, that's me sitting and talking for a few hours. So the New Discourses Podcast, which you can find wherever you listen to podcasts, if you type in New Discourses and look for the black background with the silver and white brain emblem, newdiscourses.com aggregates them all. YouTube/New Discourses houses them all in video form if you like to consume things that way instead. I am still at Conceptual James on most of the other social media platforms. Obviously, Truth Social has no problem with me. Getter has no problem with me. In fact, they rolled out the red carpet for me on both platforms. Apparently, I have a Gab. I haven't used it. My team aggregates. They've asked me to post actively only personally on one account so that they can aggregate things to other media platforms more efficiently. And so Truth is the one that we've selected for convenience. So I'm only truly active on Truth Social right now, which is not very active. My YouTube account is big. They have not rattled the saber at me. Instagram, I think, any given day might be the last. You never know. So you can follow me at Conceptual James on most of the other social media. And the company is, like I said, New Discourses. Website is newdiscourses.com, and their social media presence is everywhere, and it's at New Discourses. And I don't actually run that account. We did that intentionally in case Twitter shot me down, so we wouldn't have any threats of ban evasion to shut the company down. I've never tweeted to it. I've never logged into it. It's not me. All that's demonstrable if Twitter tried to come after it. So they will publish links to my content and messages about what's going on around me. I will not do my own tweets through them. I don't want to fall. You asked me if the rules of Twitter. I don't actually want to fall afoul of the rule of ban evasion. I don't respect Twitter, but I see no need to do that. So New Discourses is managed by my company, which of course I have oversight of, but it's not me. But I encourage you, if you want my longer form content, written content, and podcast content, to follow it somewhere, because that's where it all gets put out first and all gets put out later. And if you want to find me in person, that's where they tell you where I'm going to be when that is something that is to be known. It's often not, but that's where you can find me for now.
Well, thank you so much, James. And yeah, for all of those who are watching this, James is one of the independent content creators like me. We need your support. So, and James is a very brave person, and he's, I've seen him suffer a lot of harassment and targeted abuse because of him being so steadfast and standing up for shining a light on what these ideologues actually say in their own writings. Okay. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Andy.
So that was a shortened version of our interview. The full one I'll be uploading on my YouTube, which is an hour long. It would have been too long for this live stream, but so to watch the rest of that, keep an eye out for my YouTube link that I'll be posting on my social media. It'll be on my YouTube channel, Andy No Live. But I really enjoyed that interview. James, as you can see, is very thoughtful, intellectual, calm, well-spoken, and reasonable, rational. And, that's a side of people that you don't necessarily see with the bulldogs on Twitter. Some of them, we have to admit are vacuous, that they're just, they like to pick fights, and that's kind of all there is to them. And then some like to pick fights and actually have a lot of substance behind them. I think James fits into that. Please do watch the full interview. I asked him a number of other questions. Okay, so back to Atlanta. Atlanta was featured a lot in the news this week. So in addition to that mass shooting by the black female suspect who's been apprehended, there's also a case that has now led to an arrest. But before that, there was a lot of the usual freak out because, well, let me just rewind. So on the 17th of August, a swastika was spray painted on the Rainbow Crosswalk in also Midtown Atlanta. And some cities in America and other places in the world have tried to essentially made gay pride permanent as part of the appearance of the city. Some places have done that with BLM, like in DC, renaming a street Black Lives Matter Avenue, I think it was. In New York City, right in front of Trump Tower, the city approved painting in huge letters Black Lives Matter on the ground. So this is kind of along the same vein of that, of liberal cities run by liberal leadership doing these political left-wing statements and making it a part of the landscape. I personally find it ugly. Compare this type of artwork to some of the really beautiful bronze statues and other statues that have been destroyed and toppled, So I've become quite a big defender of saving our statues. And anyways, so swastika was sprayed on this rainbow, and it was done twice, on the 17th of August and on the 19th. And the reaction from gay media and the left-wing people on social media, as you can imagine, was to blame Republicans, blame right-wingers, blame neo-Nazis, blame fascists. For them, that's their... if somebody knows the term for it, please leave it in the comments. But kind of like where you always go back to blaming either this particular group of people, regardless of the evidence, that they're kind of just, they're behind all the evils of the world. We can think of other groups historically that were used and abused because of that way of thinking. I think in America, there are those who do that with the right. And so Atlanta police treated this with utmost concern because it was perceived as a hate crime, and also it was perceived as anti-Semitic. The swastikas were removed immediately every time, but police released footage of the suspect, and it's not a white supremacist, it's a young black man who allegedly did it. And there's security footage that captured him doing that. So they made an arrest, actually. And his name is Jonah Sampson. He's 30 years old. There was actually a big standoff outside his apartment with the police, and the whole SWAT team was mobilized. The person was eventually apprehended without incident. So currently he's booked into the Fulton County Jail. Jonah Sampson's been charged with criminal trespass, interference with government property, and criminal damage to property. And so, the story, as you can imagine, kind of just, died after his booking photo was released. But I looked into his social media posts, which are still up, by the way. He has a Instagram. The username is Pioneers553. And I was able to confirm it was him because, there were pictures of him, and in one of the pictures he posted actually him holding up his ID. So I had as much confirmation as any journalist would wish for, he did. So on this account, there are a lot of really bizarre ramblings, texts, and he posts about killing people in really graphic terms. And he had a number of posts that suggests that he's influenced by or inherent Black identity extremism. He has a particular grievance against America, particularly white America. Here was one of those posts where he wrote, "Why are they killing and mistreating Black people? We are kings and queens." And there looks like there's a threat below that he wrote, "We finna turn guns on you guys." Another one, F Anglo-America. One thing for sure, they finna get out of Africa, them my diamonds, bullets. And he wrote under that warfare. And this is recent. This is in July, by the end of July. Of course, this is a picture of him with a pistol. And he posted a photo, I believe, of himself. It was a post on his account, and you can't see his face, but it looks like him practicing shooting with a AR. So, yeah, pretty, no evidence that he's a white nationalist, but you might argue that he's a Black nationalist based on a number of these posts. Look, white people fear young N-words for a reason. They in the trap. All my young N-words. Let's get this money. The world is ours. Them white folks brought us to America for a reason, so we can blood slat them. And my folks, Native American. This been a long time coming. Within Black Hebrew Israelite ideology, and for those who aren't unaware, that's a Black identity extremist hate religious group. In some cities, you've probably seen them. They will wear like robes and weird, vaguely Middle Eastern looking outfits. It's Black men standing on the street. So they do a form of street preaching. They have, signs up that kind of look similar to the Westboro Baptist Church in terms of like this, it's vulgar and there's lots of swearing on it and there's lots of really racist, anti-white stuff. So, I mean, one of the tenets of their ideology is that Blacks are the actual chosen people of God, that they are actually come from biblical Israel. So, it's a Black supremacist ideology. Some of these posts by this guy seems to sort of allude to him being at least familiar with that. I've talked about Black identity, violent extremism before. It's something that is completely ignored in the mainstream press because we are convinced over and over that the only racial identity extremism that exists in America comes from whites, when we've had actually a number of deadly attacks carried out by Black identity extremists in recent years. I did a whole episode early on when my live stream was launched. We had in Dallas in 2016 where multiple police officers were killed in a mass shooting by a Black nationalist. And then he was killed when police sent in a robot with a bomb and blew him up. It was crazy. And it happened, by the way, at a BLM protest. It was when he killed, I think, 5 officers and injured many more. That same year was also the Baton Rouge, Louisiana Black nationalist BLM-related mass shooting of police. In 2019, I think it was, we had in Jersey City a Black man and woman, a couple, who were Black Hebrew Israelites, carry out killings of Jewish people, Orthodox Jewish people. So, it's way beyond precedent by this point. We can go back decades. The Black Liberation Army, which was allied with the Weather Underground in the 60s and 70s, they were involved in deadly attacks on law enforcement, bank robberies, breaking people out of jail. And at that time, these were Black communist revolutionaries. So there's, in America, a long history of violent Black identity extremism that's been moved under the carpet because it is an inconvenient narrative. Okay. I'm giving a content warning for this next story. It does involve rape, the topic of rape. So, Italy is about to have their elections to determine which party will then get to elect which party will get the most votes, so that in order for there to be a next prime minister in Italy. And right now, it's campaigning season. Things are heated up a lot. Italy is at the forefront in Europe regarding the migrant crisis, and has been for years and years, just because of geographically where it's placed. The most southern part of Italy, there's an island just off of it that's not very far from North Africa. Greece is also the other big entry point for migrants from the Middle East. So between Greece and Italy, these were where literally hundreds of thousands of migrants came in 2015-16 onwards. 2015, I think, was the year where more than 1 million came in, because that was during sort of the height of the Syrian civil war, which is still ongoing now, by the way, but so many Syrians have left already that migrant wave has slowed down a lot from Syria. And then, of course, there were a lot of fake refugees, those who were economic migrants taking advantage of the open streams and pathways to come in, paying people smugglers lots of money. Of course, a consequence that was warned by many and ignored was that IS, Islamic State, would also take advantage of the migrant streams to get people in and out of Europe into their training areas in Syria and Iraq. And that's exactly what they did. The Paris bombings, for example, in 2015, those who were involved in that cell, they were from France as well as Belgium. They were Muslims of North African origin. Many of them were born in Europe, but they had actually had the militancy training in either Syria or Iraq. I think it was in Syria. And they, recorded these propaganda videos that were released after the Paris bombings. The Paris bombings was, one of the worst terrorist attacks in European history. You had, I think, in excess of 100 and something people killed in the course of the shootings, the bombings. 2015 was such a bloody year for France. People kind of just forget about that. You had the Charlie Hebdo at the beginning of the year. Denmark, there was a deadly jihadist attack. And you had the Paris attacks later on. I think it was in the autumn. I forget which month. But so many people have been slaughtered on the European continent. And anyways, some of the jihadists that were involved in the Paris attacks came in and out, back and forth from Europe, actually while pretending to be migrants. So, by the way, that trial for the Paris attacks, there was only one person who was actually in person. He was the one where his suicide vest either malfunctioned or he had cold feet, but he fled from Paris to Brussels and was eventually caught. He found refuge, I think it was for more than a week, in this Muslim migrant area called Molenbeek in Brussels. So the community protected him, and that's where he's from, by the way. So, anyways, all of that. The context is now that migration is a big issue politically in Italy still, and there was a video that emerged that captured a rape on the 21st of August in the Italian city of Piacenza. And I'm not going to play the video. This is a censored screenshot from it. It's very short. The video is just a few seconds long. But the woman who's on the ground and screaming to God for help, she's a Ukrainian woman, and I had somebody translate what she said. She says, "God, please, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, please, God, no." And there's a man with dark skin unbuttoning his trouser, and the video ends. And she was raped, and somebody from a nearby building recorded that happening on the street. The suspect was arrested, actually, and he is a asylum seeker from Africa, from Guinea in particular. So there are a lot of migrants in Italy. Some of them involved in essentially the black market labor, in an underground way, because they're there illegally, or they're not really refugees, or they're trying to save up money to get themselves to a wealthier country in the EU. A lot of them want to go to the UK. There's a big migrant issue as well with the English Channel that's been going on for years. That's just been escalating. So the video was tweeted out, or not tweeted out, it was posted on Instagram by a Italian, right-wing Italian politician named Giorgia Meloni. And actually, according to polls, she is likely to become the next Italian prime minister. And so she posted the video on Instagram, and I'll read you her statement. This is translated from Italian to English. She wrote, "One cannot remain silent in the face of this atrocious episode of sexual violence against a Ukrainian woman carried out in daytime in Piacenza by an asylum seeker. A hug to this woman. I will do everything I can to restore security to our cities." So that post received huge backlash in Italy and also internationally, because, left-wing politicians said that she was politicizing the rape of a woman, that she was using a rape of a woman to push xenophobic and anti-immigrant sentiments. Ethicists can debate this issue of whether one should reproduce graphic images or video for the public. This particular video it was the beginning of a rape. You didn't see the actual act occur, but you saw the beginning of it. And the way the camera is angled, you don't see the woman's face, but you hear her voice, obviously. And it's a very distressing video. But how I feel is, I wonder why, the left don't have any issue to exploit really graphic photos and videos for their political reasons. For example, when there were some migrant child who died and washed on the shores, I think, of Turkey, that image, was graphic. It showed a dead baby, and that was blasted on the front pages of every publication on television as well, and that wasn't deemed to be hugely unethical or cruel, because I guess it was for a liberal cause, right? It was used to advocate that, therefore we need to open up our borders to let everyone in. But yeah, so that's what's happening in Italy. In the Bay Area of California, there's been a number of really shocking, horrific attacks on primarily elderly East Asian people in the Chinatown areas of San Francisco or Oakland. Really brazen daytime robberies, and then robbery plus assault. And on the 21st of, I've highlighted some of these cases on my social media, and also on my prior live streams. The elderly Asian people are left with these really horrific injuries to their face, and the Asian American community tries to mobilize around it, but they're not able to get traction. And I think the reason for that is because what we are seeing in these videos is that the suspects are almost always Black males who are engaging in the robberies and the assaults. And that is really inconvenient to the narrative. When there was the Atlanta Spa shooting, because the shooter was white, people just automatically assumed he was inspired by Trump's comments on the Wuhan virus, and that it was the right that was at fault. So there was a huge hashtag campaign, Stop Asian Hate. Then everybody started talking about it, and then evidence hasn't really shown that he was motivated by race. Instead, it was actually deeply troubled individual in regards to sex, and these spots that he was allegedly a patron of also had sex services, and he was addicted to it, and he took out his rage on the people who work there. But anyways, so on the 21st of August, a 56-year-old Asian American dentist was the victim of what started as a attempted robbery at gunpoint in Oakland's Little Saigon area. You hear her screaming in the surveillance video, and she was shot multiple times. Her name's Lily Sue. She died, and there hasn't been any arrests made. I'm going to play the video. So you see her in the black car stopping, and the car that pulls up is the one with the suspects inside. Yeah, horrific. Okay, everyone. Thank you for leaving your comments throughout. I'm sorry I'm not able to get to the questions this time, but I do read the comments and I really appreciate it. So for those who can, please support me on Patreon or Locals. You can find the links in my bio. There's a link in my bio, on my Getter, on my Twitter, that has all the links that are associated to me and all my social media. But yes, the Patreon and Locals is how I'm able to continue to do this work full time and continue this live stream experience that is completely ad free. I hope that's appreciated. I don't like selling people stuff, so I don't like how it disrupts the program, but yeah, so I really appreciate the audience that I've had, and I'm so lucky now to have gone up to 22 episodes. Okay, thank you everyone for joining Weekly Notice with Andy Ngo, and I will see you on Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Goodbye.